So today we got Paul Laursen, who's an high intensity expert here on the podcast. It will be a fascinating talk here because I listened to one of your podcasts here recently on the Elite HRV, where you went to great depth on the benefits of high intensity training. So welcome very much, Paul.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Good stuff, Paul. Great. We're looking forward to this one, so we are.
Yeah, it was fascinating to hear you be very explicit how you target various systems and your various types of training. So we'd like to get into that and also your holistic approach. Before we get into that, maybe you can take us back to where it started and your background and all that.
Sure. Yeah. So I always say I'm a failed athlete. So, and yeah, that's
welcome
my,
to the club.
like so many of us, right? But I was mesmerized by sport as a youth. I just thought it was so cool growing up in Vancouver, Canada, watching Olympics and these sorts of things, and then becoming fixated on the sport of triathlon. That was the one that caught my eye. And I sort of, it was back in the 80s when it was like, it was really, they were the crazies that were out there doing the triathlons, right? But I liked that attention, I guess, ultimately that it brought, bit ego based, but whatever. And I set my mind on trying to be a top triathlete. And then when it gained entry in the Olympics, that was what I wanted to kind of focus on trying to do. And I did that for about, maybe a good 5 years, wasted a good 5 years trying to sort of do that and traveling around. Didn't pan out. And what do you do when your dreams fail you? Well, you try to figure it out. And a lot of us turn to sports science, and that's where I went. Did bachelor's and master's at University of British Columbia. Won a nice scholarship to Australia, University of Queensland in Brisbane, and that's where the Aussies were kind of kicking goals at that time. So went down there and did some projects also with the AIS, got my PhD in the world of high intensity interval training, because I wanted to I always had this idea, when I was a triathlete trying to be a top triathlete, I wondered, what is the best session to do on any given kind of day? And that was sort of the question that I set out to get in my PhD was to answer, like, what's the training session, the HIIT session that gives you the most bang for buck. And anyways, that published all of that, and then a little bit more time in Australia, became a professor there, and went over to Perth, Australia, Edith Cowen University, and that's really where I met my key colleague Martin Buchheit. And he came over and we did a bunch of studies there in Perth for a long time. Really, we went a little bit crazy in terms of trying to pull all the different levers of interval training, your intensity, your duration of your work bout, the recovery between, and all these sorts of things. There's so many, there's almost like an infinite type number of ways you can skin a cat, like we like to say. But that's what the research that we did for a long time, published literally hundreds of papers in the area, and then wrote a big review in the journal Sports Medicine, 2-part review, and it became one of our most cited in the field. And then the Roger Earle at Human Kinetics asked us to come and write the book, basically. And that's really where we packaged a lot of that information into the book, along with, so this is called The Science and Application of High Intensity Interval Training. So we outline the science in 10 chapters, but then we also put in the application with drawing on a lot of our network around the world who kind of come in with 20 different sports, and they actually say how they apply that HIIT training, the science of that in their context. Because everyone, you're CrossFit, you're telling me, well, you're going to have a certain context that you apply your HIIT training in. That's going to be completely different to maybe my triathlete or a soccer player, a football player, et cetera, right? So that's ultimately, 20 years, Australia, New Zealand, 2 Olympic cycles in the New Zealand Olympic program, leading their physiology program, London and Rio cycles before arriving back where I am right now. I'm in the little ski town of Revelstoke, and yeah, my wife and small family here is in Revelstoke, and that's and now I continue to make hit science, and also looking at I like technology too. I'm a tech geek, so we were actually using the hit science principles and putting that into a program called Athletica, which is ultimately leveraging those principles. But that's kind of a Coles Notes of my 30-year history in the world of exercise physiology and its application to athletes. Yeah, that's the one thing I forgot to mention. I also caught the love for coaching, and I coach many top triathletes around the world and other endurance athletes.
Yeah, that's yeah, it will be a fascinating talk, because I would like to ask you so many questions. And now when you say team sports and CrossFit and triathletes, I know they're very different, but I know you work with, the aerobic system, anaerobic and neuromuscular. Could you go into those, how you work with those systems, and also I know you have different levels and how you work with that? Maybe give us a few examples later on, if you compare like a triathlete versus a football player, team sports, if any differences with examples, and then go into maybe later on holistic approach. But first off, like the aerobic system, for example.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. We like to start with the target. So again, with the background, where we kind of came to in both the reviews and the book, was we kind of, we like, our brains all like simple models. So everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. So yes, there's three main physiological targets that you can hit when you do any sort of training session. You have an aerobic target, right? Think of your heart and lungs and the aerobic muscles. So that's usually the bulk of most, cardiovascular, any endurance type based sport is that aerobic target. But as we'll speak on, there's also that anaerobic target as well, right? So think of your blood lactate, think of the muscle glycogen stores that you have, and think of the hydrogen ions, etc. So these are important systems for certain athletes. They might potentially it looks like there's lots of that in the CrossFit. Think of your rugby sevens, some of these other type high intensity exercise where they require that system to maximize their performance. Then we also have, and this one's across just about every single sport, but you can do a session and you get a large neuromuscular, musculoskeletal type stress or load on the system. It's very difficult to quantify, but we know it is there. Think of the maximal muscle recruitment that occurs. Think of the muscle soreness that you often have for days. That is a good example of a neuromuscular, musculoskeletal load stress on the system. And that needs to be quantified as well. So those are the three sort of, targets, right? So those are the three sort of targets that you'll probably have for any sort of training session. Now, here's the cool thing about HIIT is that your HIIT session, it doesn't have to be, all guns blazing and really, really hard. You can actually, if you know how to move the levers of HIIT, you can actually have a session that is low in the neuromuscular and musculoskeletal strain to preserve that system. You can have it low in the anaerobic, load, and then still have the aerobic load up there, just depending on how many, the duration of your work bout and the intensity of the intensity and the duration of the rest bout. That really dictates the anaerobic load, and we can go into that in a little bit more detail. But those are the three key targets just to start us off. So your aerobic target, your anaerobic target, and your neuromuscular target.
Okay, very interesting. And as far as the aerobic, do you use any type of guidance as far as with breathing? Because you could say, Patrick, I guess if you nose breathe, you switch about when you to mouth breathing roughly 35 liters if you're, I guess, a normal person. So that could be your anaerobic threshold. Do you work kind of like the guidance so you have some sort of knowledge where you're at? Not that it's perfect, but any type of breathing component into that, or you stay strict with with how you work, or that'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, well, that's a really cool one, and I'm really just. So I actually started in the world of with my master's work. I was starting in the world of understanding respiration and its influence in exercise. I was studying really the phenomenon of exercise-induced arterial hypoxemia. So this is the low saturation that we see in elite athletes when they're at very high cardiac outputs. And there's many different reasons why potentially that's occurring, due to a relative hypoventilation, due to a pulmonary, pulmonary
poor gas exchange.
Yes, exactly. So due to, there's a variety one, the Bohr shift. But regardless, it's been a kind of a while, and we do actually include that section in our HIIT science training. But one of the things, I guess we really don't focus on that when we're looking at when we're looking at our HIIT training. We haven't really. But only now I'm actually just starting to look at respiratory muscle training and whatnot in a targeted approach to actually look at, the whether you can actually isolate the respiratory muscles to target those specifically to improve your perfusion at high intensity exercises. Because that's often, there's the metabolic reflex issue and other factors at high intensity exercise that often can hamper us. So again, we started with the aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular targets, and that's what HIIT science is all about, where we take that targeted approach and we hit any of those in any given time. But if your lungs are your respiratory muscles are the limiter in terms of your overall performance in those, then why not target those to basically up your performance, right? So that's what we're looking at. And I'm just in this training program looking at both the respiratory muscle endurance as well as the strength, the expiratory strength, and just piloting. But that's probably where I'm going to go next, because I'm seeing some nice improvements just in my own age group hacker kind of performance. But that's where all these ideas kind of start, and it's kind of been something I think that's been forgotten a little bit. Because it's hard to quantify.
The essence of it, Paul. So you're talking about, so if diaphragm fatigue kicks in, blood is going to be stolen from the legs to feed the diaphragm. When you're talking about the buildup of, in terms of then training those breathing muscles using various devices. One aspect could be even switching to nose breathing and maintaining nasal breathing, both during rest and during low to moderate physical exercise. Because by breathing through the nose, you're adding a resistance to your breathing, both on the inspiration, but also on the expiration. And the other aspect is that nasal breathing is going to disturb the blood acid-base balance a small bit. During light to moderate exercise, there's going to be an increase of carbon dioxide in the blood from the normal of, say, 40 up to maybe 44 millimeters of mercury. And blood oxygen saturation, the SaO2, can drop down to not so much during low to moderate, but when you ramp it up a bit, with mouth breathing, it could drop down to, say, for example, 94%, 93%. And with nasal breathing, then you can drop it down to about 91%. I think playing with the breath itself, because when you are talking about aerobic and anaerobic, it kind of makes sense then, well, how can you play with the breath to influence that by, say, for example, exposing the body to higher carbon dioxide, to reduce the ventilatory response to hypercapnia, but also to reduce the ventilatory response to hypoxia. Just the Bohr effect that you pointed out on, if, for an example, an athlete is performing physical exercise with they've got a good tolerance, a high tolerance of carbon dioxide, the increased CO2 will cause a right shift of the oxygen dissociation curve, allowing more oxygen to get to the working muscles. could this be beneficial in terms of, with increased oxygen delivery then to those working muscles, due to that athlete being able to tolerate higher CO2, that it's going to delay fatigue? And the other aspect then is, if, for example, we're doing long breath holds, I'm interested now that we have a physiologist and which you in terms of, and having the conversation, doing breath holds to drop the blood oxygen saturation so that the hydrogen ion coming from the muscles doesn't get oxidized. And one of the theories is that the hydrogen ion associates with pyruvic acid to form lactic acid, which in turn dissociates into lactate and hydrogen ion. So in order to delay fatigue, if it's caused by a buildup of hydrogen ion, we do breath holding to deliberately expose the body to higher hydrogen ion to force the body to make adaptations. I'd be very interested in your thoughts on it, because the theory is the theory. And what the one thing that we've seen over the years is recovery. And also our whole idea would be with an athlete who can cope with higher levels of CO2, that they will have reduced dyspnea for a given duration and intensity of physical exercise. Because sometimes you're going to have two athletes and they're two highly trained athletes, but one guy is breathing harder and faster for the same duration and intensity of exercise than the other guy. And a strength and conditioning coach might put this down to poor condition, but we would be looking at it, well, this guy could have dysfunctional breathing patterns. Because if your breathing is off during your everyday, then your breathing is not going to suddenly correct itself during physical exercise. And I've seen MMA fighters, professional athletes, and Daniel as well, and they can have dysfunctional breathing, which doesn't get picked up on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot there, but I would think, simply put, it really kind of comes back to the development of the aerobic system. And the more you can develop your aerobic system through many of the methods that you just mentioned, the more you're going to spare that anaerobic system. So for example, a lot of the nose breathing work that you're saying, and the various, you're almost kind of creating a hypoxic type situation or a hypercapnic situation. And then you're inducing the signal to cause for mitochondrial biogenesis, right? Likely via AMPK, I guess, in that context, and AMPK to PGC1 alpha, and then the various downstream adaptations that you get, more mitochondria, more conversion to type 1 fibers, better use of sugars. There's one more, but ultimately these are the things that are going to make you feel like it's all about energy at the end of the day, right? So ATP is going to be supplied, more easily. So those two examples that you just gave, the person that is doing this more easily, they're going to be better off, and they're going to be able to throttle in and use their anaerobic system when it really kind of all counts. And they're going to have in theory, if that's the same person, they're going to have a much better outcome. So yeah, I think, I believe in all of the various different strategies that you guys are using here. I'm a big believer in nose breathing, especially during your, call it your, your maximal aerobic function, running or cycling, like, call it your, exercise within your, at or around your fat max, or your, it's usually like L2, is kind of the cutoff point, your aerobic threshold. This is, it's all around this kind of area. But and nose breathing itself, to my mind, is almost the simplest method of actually finding out where that point kind of lies. So but I'm not a believer of only do that. I'm a believer of really getting a variety of different stimulus. So I believe that almost kind of in the polarized approach to training that many of us see in the exercise realm, because that tends to be that, the bulk of your training should sort of be in that aerobic nose breathing kind of area. However, maybe, potentially 20% or 10% to 20% can be in this more the upper echelon exercise intensity domains where you are getting these anaerobic targets. Maybe you are using mouth breathing for that particular period of time. However, keep in mind that you are now recruiting the larger muscle units that you're not going to get as much when you're only nose breathing, right? We don't want to lose the ability of us to recruit those large, powerful, fast twitch muscle fibers, because we're on basically we're on a roadmap for us to not use those in our lifetime. And if we can tell our body through the neuromuscular stimulus, through the big, large, like recruiting those maximally at, a little bit of during your training week, say, for example, we're going to remind them that we're still going to be using those. So don't shut those down for us, please. I need those to function. And that's going to be really important later in life too, right? When things like balance and all of a sudden you don't even know it, but you're coming across and you've got to lift something heavy. You don't want to lose that, because you're going to run into the problem of injury. So lots of different contexts out there for different people, but I'm a big believer in still hitting that target at some time, usually in your week. But I don't believe in the all guns blazing and that's all you do. And there's some people in the CrossFit world. Sorry, Daniel, I believe they can be very, they're really focused on only hitting that. So I'm kind of believing in the best of both worlds. Context is key, but a little bit of both. But a lot of it sort of stems, if there's a core, so much stems from our breathing. And, you guys started with this, just how important that is for us to sleep. And a lot of that comes from a solid aerobic foundation and solid nose breathing.
It's kind of amazing though. One question that's often intrigued me is, why haven't sports medicine investigated nose breathing more? And I would agree with you. It's not that we want any athlete to ever switch 100%, because that doesn't make sense either. And during competition, of course, it's going to be mouth. But in terms of the nose during part of the training, but also using breath holds in making those adaptations, and also protecting. So, for example, triathletes, many of them will be prone to cyclist cough. And cyclist cough is due to high volumes of cold, dry air coming into the lungs, which in turn is going to suck moisture out of the airways, which can bring on inflammation. And their lungs then is going to take a while to recover. Whereas nose breathing with nitric oxide can moisten, warm the incoming air. Mm-hmm. So that at least part of the cycle that the cyclist can maintain nose breathing to help protect the lower airways, that the upper airways and the lower airways, which is one airway, it doesn't get traumatized. And the other thing as well with the cyclists, that they're hunched over, which can in turn affect the breathing, the biomechanics. So by breathing through the nose, you'll typically get a better recruitment of the diaphragm. And then during the swimmer, so if the swimmer then has a reduced ventilatory response to the buildup of carbon dioxide, that swimmer then can do more strokes per breath. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to lose so much then on hydrodynamic drag. But it's often because this is information that has been kind of overlooked in some ways. Would you have any perspective why the importance of nasal breathing? And it's not just about nose breathing, but as one factor within breathing, it's also about improving respiratory muscle strength. And it's also about stressor exercises, including breath holding, to stimulate anaerobic glycolysis. In a way, they've been overlooked from sport medicine, because we would love to see more science on it. I think it would be tremendous.
I couldn't agree more. But what I'm discovering, right? So again, I've been in this field for 30 years or so. It's crazy how old I am. But I can't believe I'm still finding all of these pieces that maybe they've been investigated, but man, I haven't seen too much on it. And
Yeah.
someone was suggesting to me some of the reasons. You're just spot on, right? So the other one that's completely been missed is that we're doing some work on with Hit Science is the anaerobic speed and the anaerobic power reserve. And it's ultimately that, there's different animals out there with different fiber type makeup, and that basically everything above VO2 max is a bit of a mystery zone, and we're so athlete dependent, depending on what, the roll of the dice that ultimately they've sort of had and their fiber type makeup. Regardless, back to your point, yeah, nose breathing also just completely is missed. And maybe the reason is that, well, how do you measure it? Things that get measured, they get talked about and purported and then taught by the university professor, right? So things like, we've got the heart rate monitor. We can always measure heart rate in the field. We've got the VO2 cart, but think about the VO2 cart, right? Your metabolic cart, your standard VO2 max metabolic cart. What do? You put a nose clip on yourself, right? So we're always measuring the VO2, and we're also measuring all of the FEV1 and FVC, blah blah blah, all these sorts of things. You're putting a bloody nose clip on all the time, so you're always clamping it. So that is why I think we've completely missed everything that you guys have, thank goodness, found. And all the points you kind of make. I was telling you the book Breathe that I've read as well, and it's the same sort of similar things that you guys are talking about. They're so bloody important. And for any exercise physiologists that are in there and they're doing a master's or a PhD, or they're in a bachelor's and they're thinking about doing that, for goodness sakes, think about doing a thesis in this area, because we really need the research out there on this, because I think there's a gold mine of findings and practical applications that need to be purported because of that.
One professor has been interested. His name is Professor George Dallam, and I think he's from Colorado State University. He trains a lot of triathletes at a high level in the United States. He did an interesting study in 2018 that was published. He got 10 recreational athletes. Okay, they weren't elite, and it's a very small number, but he had them breathe exclusively for 6 months through their nose during all physical exercise. And at the end of 6 months, of course, now it only takes about 5 or 6 weeks typically for the body to adapt. So initially, when you switch from mouth to nose breathing, the air hunger is a lot stronger. But if you continue doing a physical exercise with your mouth closed, the air hunger diminishes. Mm-hmm. So he waited for 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, then with a graded exercise test, he had the individuals mouth breathe during it, and he had them nose breathe during it. And with nasal breathing, they had 22% less ventilation. And that's only one study, but unfortunately, it's the only study. So I think it would be, there's definitely something worth teasing here in terms of that. I was always intrigued. So yeah. So Paul, you're the first physiologist really that I could hit. Once you told me you had a PhD, I said, all guns blazing. Here's a question for you. So thanks for answering that.
No worries. No, it's just, you think about the other thing that it does that I think also gets missed sometimes is that it causes for exercise when you're nose breathing. At first, it's difficult, right? When you first start it, but then after you get kind of used to it, like I believe you're sort of forcing your body to into the parasympathetic fat burning state a lot more, and that is like so much in exercise is. The more we can leverage the ability of our body to burn fats as opposed to burning carbohydrates and using the stress hormones to do that, the better we seem to be better off we seem to be. So I think there's probably something also there as well, and that's what when you're building more mitochondria as well, that's what you're doing, right? You're adding to you're changing the fuel distribution. You're burning more fat relative to carbohydrate because that's what mitochondria love, right? So all these sorts of things, and it's so simple to do, right? But it's so hard to do initially, and then you get kind of used to it. But yeah, just like it's, and if there's one thing you can do when you go out there and exercise, is definitely work towards breathing more through your nose in your day, right?
For some periods of time, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, for periods of time, exactly. So
Paul, you mentioned on the Elite HRV podcast your 6-level system. Could you take us through that, because that would be interesting to hear? Because I think intuitively you can almost see the way to breathe. I think level 4, the hardest one, is probably we almost have to go, if not 100% mouth breathing, maybe 70 or 80%, because it's all out. But the rest of the systems, you can maybe shift it. So it'd be interesting to see if you can take us through level 1 to 6, what you target.
Yeah. So this goes back to those 3 physiological targets where we started. That's how we get our hit types, right? So if we're looking at solely an aerobic stimulus, we would be looking at something like we've got to turn down the lever of the anaerobic and the neuromuscular metabolism. So to turn down the neuromuscular response, we might not do this running, but we might do this on the bike. So we might be using more concentric contractions as opposed to in the running, where it's a little bit more, you're combating the effect of gravity. And then you can add changes of direction in there as well to up the neuromuscular component. So again, we're turning that off. So you're doing this probably on either a rowing ergometer or on a bike. So that's the neuromuscular response low. And then for the anaerobic metabolism, we really want to utilize the myoglobin. Now, the myoglobin also is another thing that's been forgotten, but myoglobin is like the muscle hemoglobin. It sits in your muscle cells, and we can leverage that. Basically, it resaturates so quickly when there's a pause in your activity. So for example, if you're going to work hard for 10 seconds, you might pause for 10 to 20 seconds thereafter. And during that 10 to 20 seconds, there's a very quick resaturation of the myoglobin that's in the muscle. And then, and basically, if you keep that up, you ultimately wind up so that you're just continuing to use the aerobic metabolism. You can actually almost go to pretty much reach VO2 max doing this format if it continues, but have a blood lactate level of below 4, which is quite profound, right? When you think about it, you never do a VO2 max on a standard ramp test, and with a blood lactate level of less than 4, but you can do that if you're doing such a type of format. So where you pass nose breathing into mouth breathing in that format, hard to say, but that would be the one where you'd probably be able to keep your nose breathing going for the longest period of time, would be the type 1. Now, the type 2, basically, we just ramp up. You might do that exact same format, the 10 on, 20 off for repeated, and then you would maybe add the change of direction that I mentioned, or add the running component. That'd be a type 2, because that's the aerobic on, anaerobic down, neuromuscular on. Type 3 would be, now we're adding the anaerobic component in this. So we'd basically be, so there's aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular low. So in this sort of situation, you would be basically lengthening the work bout and intensity. So maybe going 20 seconds on or longer, ultimately, if you wanted to do a long interval. And then your rest or recovery bout between those bouts can be a little bit shorter. So now, because you're permitting anaerobic metabolism to match that of the aerobic metabolism, be a little bit, both are high, but again, you want neuromuscular low in the type 3. So this is, we might be doing this on the bike again. And then type 4, like you said, is all guns blazing, aerobic, anaerobic, neuromuscular. So this is all of your classic VO2 max intervals, usually on the run. So it's something, standard, 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off, and you're doing 5 of those, and you're really hearing your breath at the end, right? So, quite evident. And then the type 5s, now we're turning off the anaerobic component, we're turning off the aerobic component, and we're having maximal anaerobic and neuromuscular. And these are things, the classic Gabala, 30 seconds all out, and then 5 minutes rest, and then repeat. A lot of CrossFits are sitting in your type 5s. And, these are big neuromuscular strains. You're definitely feeling them, but aerobic component is kind of low. And it's usually associated with a lot of CrossFit pain and blood lactate or hydrogen ion sort of response. And then neuromuscular is the very last one. So type 6, and this is just like your speed training all out, or it's your gym kind of training. So we basically use that whole system with the types. When you can actually see those stresses in the program, you can, it helps you from a practitioner's standpoint in the targeted kind of approach, because you can, if you use the type system first, you can really see where you're getting the loads and the deloading in your program. You can it just sort of helps. And again, if you know how to move the levers of HIIT training, then you can actually, you can be quite clever with your programming and taking that target approach, as we've been speaking on.
That would be very interesting to see in those different levels, how you breathe, but also in between the interval sessions. Like if you do 20 seconds, like there's a popular exercise in CrossFit on the minute. So if you work for 20 or 30 seconds, how do you breathe? And also, how do you breathe after to recover for the next one, to lengthen your nose breathing if possible, to exhale slowly to recover as much as possible, but also and compare the 6 different levels, but also to see how fast can you get down to after 1 minute, after the whole training is completed, after 5 minutes, back to baseline, to see how breathing, if you do one session without any type of breathing, next session, identical session with, breathing recovery, to see if you get a difference in outcome. It's very interesting to see. I elaborate on that myself. So, but with 6 different levels and testing back and forth, it's a little tricky, but it would be very interesting to see how quickly you can come down before you go up again to kind of recuperate. So
yeah, well, I think I would guess that the more you actually trained with that purposefully, that's like, I wonder if you've done this yourself, because and again, don't forget with those latter 2 that I mentioned, right? I didn't kind of mention the breathing aspect, but the type 5s and the type 6s, aerobic stimulus is low, so therefore you should be able to apply those nose breathing principles as best as possible, because there's a low aerobic response. Type 4 is going to be impossible. You're at VO2 max, right? That's not the purpose of it. But in the type 5s and the type 6s, there's, sure, maybe it might be too difficult, but again, it's something you could progress, right? It's probably going to be difficult at first, but the better you got at keeping the nose breathing going throughout it, I bet you that would be sort of associated with an enhanced performance, and the ability to repeat it probably as well, because we're always trying to shift. We forget about this, but when we become more fatigue resistant at high exercise intensities, that fatigue resistance is coming from an aerobic enhancement. So we don't often like to think about it, but those type 2 fibers are becoming more laden with mitochondria. So you're actually, even though you're still in these big, you're recruiting these big, powerful motor units and exploding in your power. Always think of like a Michael Jordan who could kind of continue to repeat these just incredible moves, and he was just racing up and down the court. To me, he was just the epitome of someone who had completely aerobically developed his type 2 fibers. I don't know if that's the case, but that was kind of what I was thinking. He just did everything so effortlessly, and that's what beautiful. Back to really what caught my eye with sport, and why I love sport, was these types of athletes that just seem to repeatedly do these amazing feats. And I believe that they're doing this effortlessly because they're mostly sort of aerobic through them. I don't know if that's the case, but that's sort of what I'm That's what I feel.
Mm. And the reason for these levels is to train smarter, so you can kind of optimize your training. So you go from, level 4 day, you go to one of the other types of day, like whatever, back to one or whatever. What are your thoughts, if any, using, you have a level 4 day, unless you're really like world-class athlete, using breath hold the next day? Also very tough anaerobic training, but in a different way. So now you're not muscular unless you're using the diaphragm. You could be on a bike or just walk, very likely, but you can target that system. Could that be something to additionally enhance your training, so you don't have to go down? And that's what I'm trying to do as well, but on a personal level. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. These are the types of tricks that you always want to use, right? All the tools that you guys are mentioning that you're using, we leverage these sorts of things when in the right context, right? Because I've spoken to this with some of these elite coaches in the world of running, say, for example, and top class 1,500, 800 meter runners. I've spoken with John Walker's coach when I was in New Zealand. These are multiple Olympians, setting world records. They've developed the tolerance to be able to do high intensity training every single day, or even twice a day. So they have, and that's using the principle of progressive overload, that's what they've reached. And that's what to be able to optimize their performance. But not everyone's like that. And certainly I've had my sort of career, and I'm getting older now, and I can't do that anymore. So I have got to use these different tools and tricks to try to get some more longevity out of the system in the right way. So yeah, I just think like this is sort of how you can use the system, to your point, where if you know that you've had a hard session, a type 4 session on a given day, all guns blazing, well, I'll definitely need an aerobic, dominant type 1 session tomorrow, because I need to recover my neuromuscular system and my anaerobic system. Or I'm going to leverage the nose breathing concepts as well during that to continue to stress that aerobic system, probably through an anaerobic metabolism, but it's going to be low neuromuscular. So that's a beautiful way to leverage that. That's exactly how you want to think, I believe, as a practitioner.
How would you know, Paul? I know, Daniel, we were interviewing a triathlete. I can't remember who it was, but he got chronic fatigue.
Swedish guy who was best in Sweden about 10 years ago. He's done some nose breathing tests as well. So,
but yeah. was it him that got chronic fatigue syndrome and he was bedbound for 6 months?
Yeah, and which is common with triathletes. I mean, burnout is the load on training for particular triathletes is pretty immense. So
how would an athlete know though if they're pushing it? Is it via heart rate variability, or what?
I think,
what devices, Paul? Like you're talking about one athlete who is able to push themselves and their body can cope, but another athlete who may overdo it and their body shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
How can an athlete be forewarned that they're overdoing it, that they have to back off a little bit, or they have to bring in more rest and recovery?
Yeah, it's definitely the $1 million question. It's difficult for every person, depending on their personality, and so many other different factors, and all the various different stressors that are in their lives. But heart rate variability is indeed one marker of getting an insight into your sympathetic and parasympathetic balance, right? How much stress versus rest your balance is. These tools now are very practical, from Aura Ring to Whoops to phone cameras and HRV for training to Elite HRV. There's so many out there that are leveraging this now. You can do it very practically by monitoring this in the morning for using a sample of 1 to 2 minutes. And then you get an indication. You should never really, react on a single day. But what we do find is that if all of a sudden 1 week your HRV is in the tank, in other words, you're very sympathetic, that is a big, and that is coupled with the feelings of stress, like, you're also being in tune with how you're feeling, probably unable to nose breathe as easy as well, all these sorts of things, then, that's time to kind of pull back a bit. Unfortunately, we do have this overall mentality within sport, this no pain, no gain mentality, that miles win medals, that, there's more is always better. And it's just not the case. Everyone is an individual, and you need to find out what works best for you. So just because a couple Olympians did do that, I know that's, where they're doing high intensity interval training every day or twice a day, it's just they were able to do that at one point in their career. Obviously, we often see this in the younger athletes, but we don't often see that in the older athletes. So we do see a change in this ability over time, and we have to recognize that that does change, depending on your age and all these other factors. We really have to recognize that stress comes in so many different forms, from psychosocial, emotional, physical, heat, altitude. Sleep is the big one. Your how much you can actually sleep, it will actually pull it back. Your nutrition, unknown things that are probably in our environment, unfortunately, from EMFs to pollutants and toxins in the food. Like, there's just so many things, unfortunately. So this is where meditation, or just becoming in tune a little bit with how you're tracking with your body, your own body, is a bit of an art to get, but it's definitely something worth working on yourself or with a coach.
I would agree. I think a lot of people are very disconnected though. I think many people who are very trapped in their mind are very analytical, and they don't seem to have such a connect with their body, that they could be under stress, but they don't always feel it. And probably that's where devices such as monitors for heart rate variability, it gives them feedback of where they are in terms of the autonomic nervous system. And the other aspect then, sleep and sleep apnea. People who mouth breathe are at greater risk of sleep disorder breathing. And I'm often intrigued because in terms of recovery and optimizing HRV, one could be practicing breathing exercise during the day and meditation and relaxation. But then if they have their mouth open during sleep, and if they are having events such as sleep disorder breathing, whereby their blood oxygen saturation is dropping, if it's an apnea or a hypopnea, that's going to arouse them from sleep, cause sleep fragmentation, but it pushes them into increased sympathetic drive. So you could think of an athlete during the day, they're pushing their heart, but during sleep, if that same athlete is also prone to sleep disorder breathing, they're also pushing their heart, and they're not getting that recovery. And it's especially the bigger guys, not so much the triathletes, but men with an extra circumference of, say, greater than 17 inches. We always have a thing with people, never wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, because if you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, you're more likely to have sleep fragmentation, and you don't get that slow wave, deeper sleep for recovery. And it could be a very simple thing. We've been taping mouths for 20 years. I know that sounds probably a bit bizarre, but
no, I was actually just going to mention that.
Oh yeah, wow.
I've got a roll of duct tape by my bedside, and that's another big one, because if I ever do wake up with a dry mouth, I know that I've reverted back to that, and it's time to put the roll of duct, the piece of duct tape over for the next night.
Oh, we have our own tape, smile tape, but
oh, nice.
But there's the tape, and if somebody wants to buy, say, you can buy 3M 1-inch micropore tape from a drugstore, but for me it makes a phenomenal difference, and it's a simple tip just to get nose breathing during sleep for recovery.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I don't know if you know Alistair Brownlee, but he's a collaborator with us on a couple of our projects. Two-time Olympian for Great Britain, and Alistair says that He said that because I asked him on my podcast about recovery, and he says, well, for me, recovery is 90% sleep, 9% nutrition, and 1% is all fluff. So it's just, yeah, for him, the biggest one was sleep. If he sleeps well, he's recovering well.
Yeah.
And this is from, double Olympic gold medalist. So it's something worth paying attention to.
And I think we all know, sorry, Daniel.
How do you know, like if you go from level 4 to level 1, like now recovery, sleep is important, but what about, I know cold exposure, sauna, even intermittent fasting, like intermittent exposure, you got breathing, fasting, cold exposure, high intensity, all these things. How do you work with, like, if you talk about the holistic approach, like you can call it temporary physical exposure for permanent mental improvement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You work with that as well, surrounding your physical training with cold exposure, sauna, and diet.
This is why I mean, all these things have their place, right? And this is why, again, within HIIT science, this from Martin. He, my colleague, he says, content is key. Sorry, content is king, but context is God. So it's like the more you can be intuitive and I guess, study up on the benefits of all of these different factors and when they might be beneficial, then you can actually, you can apply those in the right place at the right time. So yeah, all of these things have their place. Heat is a wonderful tool or weapon to use in your arsenal because of all of the various different cardiovascular adaptations you can get. So you can get up to 140 beats a minute in the sauna if so you can have like an aerobic workout and you can work on your nose breathing there at the same sort of time. Loads of different adaptations happening at the same time there. Same with a cold exposure. That's another beauty and a great stimulus to the nervous system in a positive manner. It's going to probably help you sleep. It just depends on the situation and what you have sort of in front of you. So just keep. It's great to have all of these things as a passion projects and finding out as much as you can about all of them, and then you pull those levers and you use them in your program when they feel like they're appropriate. What you do have to be careful on is that you're not using something that is, if you get too much of a good thing, for example, like HIIT training, you're using HIIT training all the time and it's not appropriate, well, then that's going to disturb your sleep and actually going to push you backwards. Same with heat training. It is a sympathetic, it'll drive your sympathetic system as well. And that can be inappropriate if done, too much. So all of these things, there's a fine line, right? And you got to get the right stress at the right time. And that becomes a bit of an art, the art and the science.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've done a lot of cold exposure as well. So, and also heat exposure. And I know it's tricky when to do it and how to do it, because it seems like sometimes whatever you bring in, and breathing is a key component, especially with cold exposure. If you bring in a calm breathing and relaxed breathing, on the other side, for me at least, you're even calmer. HRV spikes. You can use the Oura Ring to test it. If you're just trying to do a session just to get it over with, and you're stressed, you can get the reverse result. So it's like you said, it's not just doing it and going through the motions. You actually have to be vigilant of what you're doing and you feel it, but you can also measure it. So that's a good thing. So it's interesting to hear that you also work with that and probably many other things along the way as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
no, I couldn't have said any better.
Yeah. So no, it's I mean, I have what type of measurement devices, by the way, you mentioned the Oura Ring, you track that. What else do you use as kind of test to gauge athletes?
Yeah, so that's absolutely. So it's the same sort of thing that we were talking about. the things that get measured, it's like with the HRV, that was the similar line of thinking. With the HRV, they're great little tools to kind of almost confirm what you already know. And it's the same, and it's very similar with when we're measuring things in the endurance field. That's my specialty. So if I'm on the bike, I'm measuring power output because that's so easy to do now. I'm also measuring heart rate because, again, that's so easy to do now with wearables. Or if I'm in a runner, we're measuring speed with GPS, again, because it's so it's so seamless and easy now. So all of these things can give us insight into our pace or our intensity control, that intensity during the exercise. And this is just like so many of these other factors, I believe it was what Patrick was saying, he was saying that people aren't just naturally intuitive on these things. So wearables do have a place in the fact that they can teach us a little bit about ourselves and where these sorts of things are sitting. And I find that in some of my athletes, where when they start with these wearables for the first time, and they're measuring their pace, power output, and heart rate, and I'm telling them to go in certain zones, right? We use like a 5-zone model where it's like, easy, recovery, steady, would be hard, very hard, super hard, something like that in a 5-zone kind of model. They start to know where these markers are. And that's the great, I believe, advantage of using these sorts of wearables, is that the more they do it, then eventually they don't even need to look at what power or pace or heart rate they're going at. They know what the prescription is, and they know what that is, and they might just glance down and just do a little check every once in a while. But for the most part, it just the mind gets locked into the prescription and the task at hand, and then that's just nice, just to have that sort of that pace and exercise control. And then you can, once you have that, you can work on other things like the nose breathing and these sorts of things.
I have, at least, Patrick, if you don't, one final question for you, Paul. If you take a triathlete and at least when they're doing a competition, they're never at rest, so to speak. They're always in motion, versus like a team sport like football or soccer, European football, that you're in motion most of the time. But how do you, if you can make any examples, how do you train them differently in a sport that's very long in endurance versus somebody, on and off a little bit more, but both can use high intensity? Do you have any general guidelines for that?
Yeah, for sure. You have to appreciate the context of both populations ultimately, right? So I think we've kind of spoken mostly about the triathlon or endurance sports specialists, where they tend to be a little bit more geeky, and they know that these wearables can give us all these sorts of things. So it's quite easy to prescribe according to the paces and the zones that I just sort of mentioned. But now we go to the team sport context that you bring up, and they don't really want to have a wearable, and a lot of times they don't want to do conditioning sort of exercise. So you've got to get a little bit more clever with these. And we might use something called like small-sided games, where you create basically a game that's a mini scrimmage ultimately, where they're performing that, but you might actually have certain goals and aims of that scrimmage, or that to actually induce the intensity, and you do it for a certain duration, and you're going to do this game at a certain rate ultimately for a given time. And so you got to get a little bit more clever with that. Now, of course, when you reach the more elite stage in footballs, well, then it's time to have a big boy or big girl talk. It's like, come on, you want to, how good do you want to become? We need the conditioning on a certain day, and then we might use some of these short intervals with changes of direction to make sure that they are they're topped up in these parameters. Because one of the key things for team sports is the injury risk, right? if they're not getting the right stimulus in their program, especially with that neuromuscular component, at high intensity, and then all of a sudden they're not getting that for like a week, and all of a sudden it's game day and everything's on the line and they're sprinting down, and we've got a hamstring injury or whatever the case may be, just unacceptable. So that's where we've got to have the programming in appropriately at the right spot. So yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's also, like, I understand, it's not just sport specific, it's also personality specific, because the triathletes are usually, there are people looking for that extra edge constantly, while people maybe in team sports are a little bit different as well. So you have to, like you said, have the finger on the pulse a little bit to what works for that particular person or sport. So that's I can kind of read between the lines as well, that you have to find your way, whatever works in whatever sports you're in as well. You can't generalize all sports here on the planet and say this is what you need to do, but you have to move, and have different programs for each sport almost. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we always say context is God. You got to know the context.
Yeah, I'll remember that. Patrick, any final questions here?
No, I think it's been great. I think it's been some great points here. So it's been a great conversation. So yeah, I'm pretty much done.
Yeah. Any last thoughts from you as far as where you see HIIT and maybe breathing in the future? You think it'll come closer as far as see what you can do with HIIT and breathing in combination, or what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm playing with this P100 right now, with my colleague Steve Neal, and this is just, again, it's the same sort of thing that you're talking about, Patrick, with the nose breathing and stuff. I still don't think we're done with targeting certain aspects according to context, right? So I'm getting some pretty cool. It's almost like the whole respiratory muscle system, right, is a whole other coordinated musculoskeletal area. And one thing I'm just kind of fascinated with is the control of my breathing that I've gathered, right? So now when I go out and I do my type 4 VO2 max intervals, well, I've actually got better. I'm feeling like I've got more control on my breathing towards the latter aspect of that. It doesn't feel as disjointed, or I actually feel like I'm controlling my respiratory muscles more. So I guess to answer your question is that's what I'm curious about right now. I'm looking at that. So yeah, maybe we'll do a part 2 next year or something like that, and I can tell you a little bit about what I've discovered.
That would be great.
Excellent.
Look forward to it already, Paul.
Awesome, guys.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Pleasure, Paul. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. All the best.